Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this month for our Teams Developer Community Call. So let me get into the agenda for today. So I'll quickly do an introduction for myself, talk about some of the new features that have come out in the last 30 days as part of our developer platform, and we're going to dive into a specific topic around line of business app development and publishing and management. So this is all about how within your organization, you can actually manage permissions over who can use apps and who can develop apps. And we've got some great new ways for IT organizations to actually go and use our admin center to go and manage policy. And we'll dig into that a little bit, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. So just a little bit about myself. As Andrew introduced me, my name is Larry Jin. I'm a PM on the Teams platform, and I've actually worked in this area for Teams for about 3 years and change now. So I've actually had the sort of honor and privilege of working on the product over the last few years and actually seeing it grow from the very beginning. So it's been very exciting to see how far we've come. And along the way, all the folks that have joined and participated in our developer community, such as yourself. So it's been very, very exciting to see that growth and momentum. So I'll start off with a little bit of a recap of what's new for developers and some of the cool things that we've brought to production and dev preview over the last 30 days or so. The first two are new extensibility features that allow you to bring even more richness to conversations by taking advantage of some of the investments that you've already made in messaging extensions. So for those that are familiar with messaging extensions, these will feel very similar. The first is message actions, which is the ability to actually register custom actions on messages. And I'll show you a quick demo and the pointer to the documentation on that in just a minute. The second, which is related, is this concept of smart link unfurling, which is the idea that when a user pastes a URL, if that URL points to a domain that you register as part of your app, your service can actually return a rich preview for it. So much in the same way that a user can search for something using the messaging extension and return a card and send that in a message, you'll now be able to do that kind of automatically through this concept of smart link unfurling. And again, I'll show you a quick demo of that as well. We've brought a set of APIs for programmatically managing shifts. So this is very important for our first line worker scenarios. As some of the folks on the call may be aware, if you've been following some recent developments in Microsoft Teams, we've made a big push in the retail and first line worker space. So with these large organizations that have shift-based workers, we've created a dedicated app experience within Teams on web, desktop, and mobile for managers to go create shifts and for line workers to actually go and consume those shifts and update them from their mobile devices. And now in the graph, we have beta APIs for you to actually go programmatically manage that. A couple of things that have gone general availability. The first I'm very excited about is the ability to deploy your SharePoint framework solution as a Teams app. I believe this is something that we've covered in the past. We have a blog post that went out covering this, so I encourage folks to check that out. Basically, the idea is that if you've built solutions using the SharePoint framework, if you've built a web part, if you've been using that for your internal organization or your intranet, you can now actually package and deploy that into Teams as its own line of business app. The last one is app setup policy. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in depth later, but really with policies, you now have a lot more options and the ability to go and manage not only which users can use which apps in your organization, but with setup policies, you can actually pre-configure certain apps to show up on the app bar. And then lastly, we have a number of other new graph features that have come to both beta and V1, and I'll touch upon that in a minute as well. So first off, new features, as I mentioned, message actions and smart link unfurling. So you can see there in a couple of these screenshots with message actions, this is really taking advantage of that same message extension protocol and the service that you've already built, and you can now attach that to individual messages. So the idea is that if an end user adds your app, all of their messages will now have this custom action provided. You can see here on the right, we have a couple examples. These are just internal ones that we've created, one for replying anonymously and the other for set reminder. These are two example apps that we've built internally just to kind of test the scenario end to end. But it's very cool what you can now achieve using these message actions. You can imagine taking a conversation or a message and creating a task out of it, creating a bug out of it, maybe sending it to your CRM system or your ticketing system. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities and scenarios that you can fulfill using this. Similarly, with smart link unfurling, as you can see below, the idea is that when a user pastes one of these URLs, if that domain is associated with an app that can unfurl it, so to speak, we'll basically make a call out to your service, and your service will have an opportunity to respond and return one of these rich cards. In this example here, we pasted a Visual Studio Team Services and now called Azure DevOps URL. And on the back end, that message extension for Azure DevOps automatically converted that URL into one of these rich cards, which is then shown in preview form in the compose box. So when the user sends that message, they'll be able to go and send that card. So actually, why don't I jump over and give you guys a really quick demo of what that actually looks like in the product. Let's go back into Teams here. So just hop into our social channel here. It's actually our internal environment, but that's where we've got some of these bits. Now, message actions and smart link unfurling are both available in our developer preview environment. So if you've enabled dev preview and you check out our documentation, you can actually start building this now. So I'll start with the message actions. You'll notice here that we now have these controls sitting on top of the message, one for reactions. So you can add emoji reactions to messages. But you can also add one of these message actions. So if I click on more actions, you'll see that I've got a couple of these options here, the same ones I showed in the screenshot, one for reply anonymously and the other for set reminder. So click set reminder, and that might take a few seconds for it to spin up, but we'll let that go. So what's happening inside of this experience is that it's actually running a task module. For those that are familiar with the task module, it's basically enabling embedding either an adaptive card or a web view inside of this experience. And so the idea that there would be a form that pops up here. So maybe give it a couple more seconds and see if that works. This is probably using a free tier of Azure, so it might be taking a few seconds to spin up. All right, let's try a different one. Try this reply anonymously, see if that does any better. Here we go. So you can see here that this this test app for replying anonymously, it popped up one of these task modules, and inside of this task module, we've got a basic form that's backed by an adaptive card, and I can type in text message here, and I can click submit. So this is really cool. Click submit. Now, on the back end, all of this is basically sending messages back and forth to your service, your message extension service, and then your service can handle and process that event however you want. So, you know, if you have a bot, that bot can go send a message one-on-one to a user. If it has a tab, it can go and reflect that behavior in the tab. So really up to you how you want to go chain this message action with some of the existing app capabilities that we have in the platform. The other thing that I'll show really quickly is the smart link unfurling. So let me go grab this URL really quickly. You'll see here that this is our Azure DevOps instance. So this is pointing to a work item. So a very common scenario is that people will be, using Teams, and they'll also be using the browser. And in the browser, they might have other tools open. Let's say, for instance, that they're using Azure DevOps for project management. And they're going to be wanting to converse about these URLs and collaborate around them. So in this case, let's assume that I copy this URL from the browser, click paste in here, and after a second or so, you'll see here that this showed up. Now, in this case, I haven't configured Azure DevOps yet, so it actually doesn't know what project I'm using. But if I click setup, that should take me into the flow. Now, this flow is actually exactly what would happen if you try to use the Azure DevOps message extension from the ribbon down below. So I'll just go ahead and I will select my, organization, and then choose the project. And now in a moment here, what should happen is, yep, there you go. It automatically converted that URL into a card, and you can hit send. Now, what's great about this is that Again, it's using the same protocol, it's using the same stack as a message extension, but for an end user that's not used to invoking the message extension from this interface, it's very intuitive for them to just copy and paste URLs, but still get that value through the message extension. So both of these features, like I mentioned, are available in developer preview, and you can find them in the documentation. So you hop over to the browser here. We've made a couple of updates to our documentation under the message extension node. The first one, under this initiate actions with message extensions node, we have now a new section that calls out how you can attach your actions to individual messages. And you can see here that we have some examples where in this screenshot, we have a Dynamics app, OneNote, I'm not actually sure what that is. And then we have an Asana app. This is just kind of a fictional screenshot, but you can imagine the kinds of scenarios that you can achieve through message actions. Similarly, with link unfurling, we've added a new section here where you can declare support for this new handler. So you'll notice that in the manifest under the compose extensions declaration, we've added a new section under message handlers where you can specify the different domains that your app supports to automatically unfurl. So really interested to see what you guys create as you start playing around with this stuff. I mentioned earlier that we've got some really cool Graph API updates. So these are some of the big ones that are worth calling out. We now have application permission for app CRUD. So a common scenario for teams around automating life cycles is that they'd like to programmatically install apps into teams, and they'd like to be able to read back the set of apps and really use their own proprietary workflows and business logic to go and manage the apps that are installed to teams, as well as to perform other tasks like pinning tabs and removing tabs. And so now we provide application permission support in addition to user delegated support. This one is a bit of a high note. We've enhanced the messaging API, so now you can actually reply to messages in channels. Previously, you were only able to create a new reply chain in Teams. But now you're actually able to reply to that message. And we've made some necessary improvements to the formatting as well, so that you can include things like subject lines and at mentions. So now when you create the automation using the messaging APIs in the graph, you'll be able to fulfill a lot more, richer scenarios than what you could before. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we now have these new shifts APIs in beta. So if you're building solutions for retail or for first-line workers, you can now programmatically manipulate the shifts that show up in the Teams product. So getting into the meat of today's topic, new ways to manage apps, really excited to talk about some of the new policy innovations. But first, I'll start with just kind of recapping the different types of apps that we typically see being used by customers and being developed by organizations. So of course, we have first-party apps that are developed by Microsoft, and these are typically Office 365 workloads like Planner, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, SharePoint, so on and so forth. Now, of course, these are fully compliant. They're pre-installed in the Teams experience. We also have these third-party apps that are published by external ISVs, many of whom we've partnered with over the last couple of years to go build these solutions and publish them into the Office store to show up in Teams. They represent a lot of popular productivity applications, as well as apps for things like developers, for marketing, sales. We have various social apps, polling. And these apps are going to present different concerns from an IT admin standpoint. And lastly, we of course have the custom apps, otherwise known as the line of business apps. So of course, these are custom ones that are built by your organization and deployed centrally through the Teams admin experience. And really, they're customized for your business's needs. And so over the next few weeks and months, you're going to see us roll out really great new ways for admins to go and manage these, both in terms of which apps users can use, as well as who can build them. So let's start by recapping some of these really key needs for IT admins, right? As I mentioned or alluded to earlier, the major one that comes up quite a bit with our customers is, how do they go and allow or block specific apps for individual users? That's something that comes up time and time again. The second, which is a related task, is how do you control which users can actually go build these custom applications and publish them into the organization, a task commonly known as sideloading. The third one, which we don't have a great way to do this today, is if an IT organization wants to go and publish and kind of promote these apps, how do they go do that? So that's encapsulated in 3 and 4. We have an ability for an IT admin to go and submit it to the line of business catalog, but there isn't really a great way to make them really prominent and discoverable. Now, 1 and 2, these are available today, but only at the tenant level. So if you go to the Office 365 Admin Center, we have the Teams blade where you can go and manage these things, but they're very, very coarse-grained, and you can't assign those policies on a user level. I mentioned, as I mentioned, you can already publish apps into the line of business catalog, but what we're missing is a way to make those apps, those custom apps that you built, more prominent and more discoverable in the end user experience. And so this just recaps the legacy Office 365 admin experience for managing Teams apps today. You can manage the first-party apps built by Microsoft. You can go and manage, enable, disable company apps, third-party external apps, and you can enable or disable sideloading. But again, all of these are tenant-level actions. They're not something that you can go and manage on a per-user basis. And so this ends up adding quite a bit of friction for our customers who want to be able to gradually roll out a particular app or only allow specific users within the organization to build and sideload. And so now as we transition into the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, we'll now have a host of new capabilities for admins to go and manage these things. The first is the concept of app setup policies. So this is a way for you to make apps much more prominent and to customize the end user experience that they get when they launch Teams. Effectively, what this means is the app bar that the end user gets. As an IT admin, you'll actually be able to pick and choose what features, what apps show up on that experience, and which ones are there by default and the order in which they appear. And that I'll show you in a minute here. The second is the concept of app permission policies. So today you can go and manage apps that allow and block them at a tenant-wide level, but going forward you'll be able to do this for individual users. You'll also be able to specify the concept of an org-wide setting, which is really kind of a tenant-level override. So if there are specific apps that you absolutely want to turn off for your organization, you'll be able to do that, but of course you'll also be able to assign policy for specific users. Now, the Teams product takes care of enforcing all of this so that if you block a specific app, all the interactions will be disabled and that app is not going to show up in the product for the end user. Lastly, we have more granular sideloading policies. And so a couple of things I'll call out here. One is, of course, that you'll be able to manage this on a per user basis. So let's say that you only have 100 users in your organization that you want to have the right or the permission to go and upload custom apps, you'll be able to grant that. But secondly, I think just as important is that we've separated the sideloading and permission policies so that if you want to go and manage which apps third-party apps are allowed or blocked from the third-party from the Teams App Store, and you want to manage that completely separately from who can sideload, those two settings are now decoupled. Historically, those two settings were actually sort of intermingled so that you couldn't actually granularly manage which third-party apps are on or off without also enabling sideloading for the organization. Or turning off sideloading, rather. So hop into a quick demo of what this actually looks like. Go back into my browser here. So we'll start off with the Admin Center. So for those that are familiar with this experience, I'm logged into here, and I can manage all the policies across my organization, and then I can assign policies for specific users. But I'll call your attention to this new section here under Teams Apps. And we've got a couple of new policies that we've created, and these will be the ones that I just mentioned. The first is permission and second is setup. And so the experience here is pretty straightforward. We have here a list of all the policies that have been created. So this happens to be a test tenant where we're managing all these different policies. I'll go down here to the org-wide default. So this is the one that kind of comes in the box. Everyone gets it by default. And so by default, all the third-party apps are allowed. All the tenant apps are allowed. These are all of the custom line of business apps that you've built, and there are no specific blocked apps. Now, in this case, we've gone and we've added Wunderlist as one of the apps that we want to block as part of this policy. And if I want to, I can go add more apps to this. So for instance, if I really don't want any users using, let's say, the Jenkins developer tool, let's try a different one. I was searching in the wrong list, actually. So these are all the Microsoft apps only. So actually, if I search something like SharePoint, that should show up. There we go. So I can add SharePoint to the list of blocked apps here. And so that'll prevent users from using this app. So if I click save, that'll go and make the update. Hopefully this doesn't blow up our test tenant, but you never know. A moment there. So that was successfully updated. And now if I actually want to go and apply that policy to a user, I go here to the list of users, and I'll select a random user here, Adele Vance, and I can update the assigned policy. Now in this case, she already has the global org-wide default policy assigned, but if I want to, I can go and update that to something else. So I can choose the policy for her. This one sounds very scary, block everything. I can assign that policy. Now, a lot of our customers, what they'll do typically is that they will create and craft the policies within the Teams UI here, but then to actually assign them to individual users, they'll typically use something like PowerShell commandlets, because that tends to scale much better for larger organizations where you have to go and assign policy over a large number in a list. The second policy that I'll show you is setup policy. I'll go down to one that we've already created, this developer policy. So again, this policy is going to govern which apps show up by default out of the box for end users in the app bar. And so you see here that we have a number of these third-party apps that we've added in addition to the standard ones that you get, like Activity, Shifts, Teams, and Chat. But we've also added third-party apps like Bitbucket and Karma, Smartsheet, Trello, and Mural, as well as GitHub. And of course, I can add additional apps to this if I want to by searching for specific ones. So if I want to add, let's say Jira, I can go ahead and add that to this policy. Now, again, if I want to assign this to an individual user, I'd go back to the users list, pick the users that I want, and then assign this specific policy to them. Now, you might be wondering what that actually looks like in the product. So I'll head back into this Teams environment. This is logged into as one of the users in that tenant that you just saw. On the left here, you'll notice something very different and very new, is that rather than having that plain vanilla Teams experience where you get just that activity and chat and Teams and files, you now have all of these additional apps that have shown up here. And this is incredibly powerful because now as an administrator of the organization, you have way more flexibility in terms of how you want that end user experience to manifest. So jumping back in here, we'll talk a little bit about some of those common scenarios for using pinning. Let's say that you've built a line of business app like help desk or talent management, and you want to ensure that the users in your organization are actually using it and they're finding it easily within the product, then app setup policy is a great way to ensure that because you can pin it directly on the app bar. Secondly, you might have specific apps that you want to assign by job function. So if you have the sales department and you've built a custom sales dashboard, again, you can use app setup policy to ensure that those users have it more prominently in their experience. You can use it to roll out, gradually roll out new apps. So if there's a third-party app that you're interested in for your organization, but you don't want to open it up to every single user, again, you can use this as a way to drive and encourage discovery, but only among that specific set of users. And then lastly, many of our customers actually use this capability to streamline the Teams client. So many of our retail customers in particular will want to go deliver a more simplified version of Teams experience where it'll only have things like activity, chat, and shift management. And with app setup policy, you're now able to control that. And of course, we make sure that this experience is consistent across the web, desktop, and mobile clients. So in fact, if you were to set this policy here, as an end user on the iOS and Android clients, you'd actually see a consistent experience where you'd get these 5 apps above the fold on the mobile client, and then the rest of these would fall into the overflow. So this is the overflow on web desktop, and we have a similar entry point on our mobile clients for that overflow. Now, of course, a very big use case is how you stitch this together with sideloaded apps. So for instance, here we have in this Contoso tenant, this one measly sideloaded custom built line of business app, the FileBot. But if you wanted to, you could use app setup policy to actually prepin that. So for instance, if I wanted to make that more prominent, go here and I can search for FileBot. So you notice that FileBot shows up here as one of the possible apps that I can go and pin as part of this policy, which would then make that show up by default on the app bar for this user that has the policy assigned. So for this particular topic, for some of the policies that we just talked about, we've updated our documentation and we have that available online at this link. And then, of course, we have our typical developer community link here. So really encourage everyone on the call to take a look at the new stuff that's come out in the last 30 days, in particular, message actions, smart link unfurling, some of the new graph capabilities that we've talked about. But most definitely encourage everyone to take a look at the new policies that are coming your way, especially for those that are administrators within their organizations. This is going to be very important in terms of your overall rollout and adoption strategy. So coming up next month, we have a really cool topic. We'll go back into kind of the usual more dev-oriented conversation, but it's going to be around best practices for how you build an effective app that combines bots, message extensions, actions in both one-on-one and group contexts. So this is a topic that's actually very near and dear to me. Having worked on bots and message extensions for the last few years, we really want to help developers have a good strategy for how they incorporate all of these features into their app experience to build something that's cohesive and delightful for their end users. So I think with that, I'll pause and I'll hand it over for Q&A. Andrew, if there's anything else that you want me to bring up, I'm definitely happy to do so.
That was awesome. Thanks, Larry. If anybody has any questions, feel free to add them in chat or call out. If you are going to unmute yourself and call out, please do remember to mute yourself again after you finished asking your question. Looks like we have a question coming in through chat. Is the Teams admin available now?
So I'm assuming that you're talking about those specific policies. So app setup policy, that's actually going to be rolling out over the coming days. To our general audience. We've already been quite successful in bringing that to our tap audience, and so a number of our customer tenants have already started using the app setup policy that you just saw, but that's going to be coming to production in very shortly. And then the other two policies around permission and side loading, those are going to be coming in the following weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, the app setup policy, that's going to be rolling out broadly to everyone. And then permission policy, we're going to be first entering tap with a specific set of customers in late March, early April timeframe. And then we expect that in sometime in April, we're going to start rolling out the permission policy for blocking and allowing specific apps. That'll be coming to production again sometime in the April timeframe. So if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and start to wrap up. And do please join us next week. We're really excited about the showing you how to build immersive conversational interactions, combining a bunch of different functions. I think it's going to be really useful, and a lot of the stuff that Larry previewed today is going to be as part of that talk as well. Will the PowerShell commands be available at the same time as the app setup policy? Yes. Yeah. So we'll have commandlets for assigning those policies, those new policies that I mentioned, in the same way that we have a policy assignment for all the existing ones. So yes, those will be available when we roll those out. I believe the app setup one is we already have the commandlets. I don't think we've published them yet, so that'll be coming very soon.